Offutt Air Force Base was just on the edge of Omaha, Nebraska. Many of those in my career field would do 15 out of a 20-year career here in Nebraska. And the running joke was, once you're on it, you couldn't get off it. I took that as a personal challenge. I was assigned to be an electronic warfare officer in the back of an RC-135 rivet joint. This was the Air Force's premier spying platform because of all the different positions it had on board. The irony here is that I was continuing my follow-on training at the 338th Combat Training Squadron. Now, this airplane was considered a high-value aerial asset because of all the specialized equipment on board. And so the funny thing is, we weren't allowed to get near the combat. Yes, we supported combat from a distance, a very far distance, but we could not be in the high-threat areas because we were a high-value asset. So, Combat Training Squadron. So I would have preferred a patch that said spying or observing rather than combat. So when I deployed to the Middle East for 3 months, nobody shot at me, no rocket-propelled grenades. I was left wanting. But on the upside, we weren't sleeping in foxholes. We weren't worried about a constant threat. We were housed in comfortable modular trailer buildings with great AC, and we were on the safe side of the Persian Gulf, so we had that going for us. Our missions began with a 3-hour flight from Qatar around Iran and into Afghanistan, where we stayed on station at about 30,000 feet for 6 hours at a time, and then 3 hours back home. We did that every third day. On base in Qatar, we had restaurants, we had great gyms, we had a movie theater, we had 2 different pools, one indoor, one outdoor. We also had a Dairy Queen. And we had an education office where I could take online classes for my master's degree. Once again, I felt a little guilty because I knew we had service members over in that part of the world that were actually roughing it, fighting the war for us. But, I took advantage of what they had to offer me. And I was able to connect with another officer on my crew who understood how I felt about receiving hazardous duty pay when we felt like we weren't in any more danger than a Delta Airlines crew passing through Detroit. But my job and what my airplane were contributing to the mission sounded really important. We all had top secret SCI clearances, and we did have linguists on board who could actually make a difference in the fight with the information that they were collecting. But as far as my job, electronic warfare, there just really wasn't much to do. It just didn't feel needed, like I needed to be there away from my family. And this was confirmed when one of the members of my 3-person crew had to go to a conference. She was higher ranking than me, so they pulled her to go to a conference on the ground in Afghanistan. And we continued flying a couple of missions without her, which only proved that all 3 of us did not need to be there on the airplane. I did 3 deployments like that, and every time I would come back home, I volunteered for additional opportunities where taskings would come down from higher headquarters where they just needed a rated officer to serve in a position in Iraq or Afghanistan. Nobody else wanted these positions because they were going to be serving outside of their primary specialty, maybe in like an administrative role. And for me, that was the whole point. I wanted to serve outside of my specialty. At least I could be where I felt like I was needed. But these assignments were given to those who didn't really have an impressive record and needed something to show when they went up to a promotion board. So I never got one of those opportunities. Now the difference with the recce, the reconnaissance squadron that I was in, we were not like the fighter world with fighter pilots, where it was dog eat dog, where you had all these hard chargers just trying to step over each other to get ahead. And so a guy like myself coming along trying to do more to get some sort of satisfaction from it, I was upsetting the peaceful, even tone of my squadron. And my leaders started to take notice. One day, my director of operations, a soft-spoken RC-135 pilot, called me over to him. He said, "Lieutenant Hawkins, do you know Lieutenant Colonel Mays over at the Operational Support Squadron?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, they're looking to hire a new wing scheduler." And I told him, "You might be a good fit for the job," which really meant, yeah, we'd rather let you go because you don't really fit in this squadron, which was fine with me. So I called over to the Operational Support Squadron and I made an appointment to meet with Colonel Mays. In the days leading up to the appointment, I heard from everybody that this was a career killer because I was in an operational flying squadron right now, and going to the support squadron meant you really had a diminished role. I would still have to fly as an electronic warfare officer, but not as much, which would mean that I wouldn't stay as proficient in my job and I wouldn't be a primary for deployments. But these leaders were not familiar with the paradigm in my head. Career progression was the furthest thing from my mind. I just wanted to actually be doing something that I felt was important. So I felt if I can talk my way back into the Air Force, then I should be able to talk my way into getting this wing scheduler job. I needed this job. So I head over there for my appointment with Colonel Mays, and he had a quick stride in his step and an easy smile, and he was pretty friendly, putting off good vibes. We sit down, and he starts off with, "So I hear you don't like flying." And I said, "Whoa, hold on." And I had to pull back for a second and let him know that I was actually a private pilot and that I wasn't afraid of flying or anything like that. I just didn't feel like what I was doing was important. So I told him I was just looking for other opportunities where I could feel like my skills were actually put to use and I was contributing something. And he nodded and he understood where I was coming from. And he told me that this position would give me more visibility with some of the higher ups on base and possibly provide more opportunities to do other things. And then he went into the details of this very critical and demanding position of the wing scheduler, who managed all of the flights on the base for that day. And they worked for a week at a time on those flights. And the rest of the weeks they were building and organizing the flights. But the job was so significant that the wing scheduler responsible for that day had to go to the daily stand-up meetings with all of the key leaders on the base who had to report to the general. And when the general would ask questions about the flights for that day, the wing scheduler had to know the answer. For an administrative position, this was pretty much the most high-profile job a lieutenant could have on the base. So I was excited about this opportunity. And then he told me that they had 2 other lieutenants that they were going to interview for the position as well. So I really wanted this position, and not just for my career, but because I needed something to distract me from the way things were going at home. Tina was now running an in-home daycare. And when I came home, I was not excited to see my house filled with other people's kids. The noise and the mess, she thrived in this situation. She loved kids. So this is something we would argue about. And the irony here is part of the reason that she started a daycare was because I didn't make her feel secure. I was emotionally all over the place, and she needed to feel like she had some sense of control in our life. And worst case scenario, she needed to know that she was able to take care of herself if I just went off the deep end. So I was just in the habit of coming home and checking in with her briefly, hugging my 2 kids, and then going down to the basement to work on my online master's degree. Getting my master's degree in international relations was the other iron that I was going to have in the fire. It was my backup plan to go be a foreign area officer if it looked like I wasn't going to be able to get off this base after a few years. When the other parents came to pick up their kids, we talked about the wing scheduler position, and Tina asked me, "Are you sure you're going to be okay working longer hours?" And I said, "Yeah, if it feels like I'm doing something important." It wasn't a way of her sneakily saying that she didn't want me to be gone. Tina was very capable and she could handle things at home by herself. In fact, I was probably getting in the way more times than not. And then I threw out there, well, besides, I really don't like being home very much. Then I went on to complain about the daycare, and she made some good points that it was good for our kids to have this interaction with others. And she still wanted to pay off the $30,000 of school debt that she had. And I threw it at her that she chose to go to a private school, knowing that she chose to stay in town because she wanted to still be there for her little sister. And like I said, I knew that part of the reason she was doing this was because I made her feel unsettled. She needed to feel like she was still capable of taking care of herself. So this just made me feel worse because I would hear other guys complaining about their wives, how they overspent and didn't take care of the house and deprived them of intimacy and didn't take good care of the kids. And I had nothing to complain about with Tina except for this daycare, which was really my fault. I wasn't doing enough to make her feel secure because I just couldn't get over it that I didn't get to be a pilot. If I could have just let that go and then just focused on gratitude and moving forward, everything would have been great at home. And we could have put all our energy into helping our troubled 4-year-old, Holly. We knew pretty early on that something was different, but we couldn't quite put our finger on it. And then one day, she wanted to be spun around in my office chair, the swiveling chair. And I spun her, and no matter how many times I spun her around, she could not be made dizzy. And we knew that that was a sign of something. So we hoped that this would be a clue to help us understand why she was so bright, but yet so difficult. And we needed to figure this out because we had another baby boy on the way. So these are some of the things that were floating around in my head. All the while, I'm still waiting to learn if I'm going to get the wing scheduler position, which I desperately need. Thanks for watching. I hope you come back for chapter 13.